Shikues të nderuar, mirëmbrëma dhe mirë se vini në emisionin Jeta në Kosovë. Pavarësia e Kosovës me gjas po afrohet. Me këtë po rritet edhe aktiviteti i politikanëve kosovar në arenën ndërkombëtare. Çka po thojnë të hujt për ne? Çka po u thojmë ne të hujve? Kur do ta ketë Kosova korin e vet diplomatik? Cilat janë sugjerimet e ekspertëve ndërkombëtar të cilët vijnë nga shtetet që e kanë kalu fazën në të cilën Kosova po hyn tash? Përveç kësaj, të shikojmë edhe intervistën me Jeff Hun, ministrin e Anglisë për Evropë, dhe intervistën me Skender Hyssenin, zëdhënës të ekipit të unitetit.
Mr. Mayers, you're from South Africa. Everybody knows South Africa as a victory of democracy over apartheid. Basically, what is the parallel that you can draw with Kosovo from what you've heard in the conference here?
I think the most important parallel is the fact that one has to find the basis on which people can start to work together in forming a new nation. Basically, South Africa came from a divided past that existed for more than 300 years. Apartheid became known in the last 40 years of that period, but before then, there was always racial separation. So it was very important to bring the people together and to build a new nation, and on top of that, to make it a democracy. And I think the parallel where Kosovo finds itself is that up till now, it was not a state. It was not a nation in itself. And therefore, it's a new beginning. And South Africa made a new beginning in 1994. And that is, I think, where the parallel is coming in. At the same time, in South Africa, we had not only racial hatred, but violence that led from that. And again, the history of Kosovo tells us that there was a lot of violence, particularly in more recent history. So there are certain obstacles that you have to overcome, which we had to overcome.
How do you resist? Do you get such discussions in South Africa? And how do you resist not having the majority rule?
Democracy is not only about majority rule. And I think that is where the most important starting point comes in as far as the new constitution is concerned. In our case in South Africa, we succeeded in overcoming that particular aspect, like you referred to, by reaching a political settlement on the substance and the contents of the new constitution. And that constitution guarantees today my rights as an individual, despite the fact that I was part of the minority and still is.
In Kosovo, we can guarantee all sorts of rights on paper. We have the best laws on paper. But in reality, they don't work. How did you make it a reality in South Africa?
Maybe there was a little advantage, and that was that South Africa had a governing system that operated for a long time. It was concocted. There were major shortcomings. The fact that it was only representative of a small minority, but it was a working system. So we could utilize that system and transform it into the new. And that was a factor that played an important role. But coming to the point of the new constitution, an inherent safeguard that helped us to overcome these fears and beliefs of people that it won't work was the introduction of a constitutional court. And we gave the power to the constitutional court to judge on the activities of everyone, from government, from the president of the country right through to every individual. And that has happened in the last 13 years since our independence, since our democracy came into being, that the Constitutional Court is being respected by all South Africans as the final authority, as I said, including that of the president.
How did you start off the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa? Who initiated it and who drove it forward?
I think a very important aspect to remember is that we only started the Truth and Reconciliation process after the completion of our constitutional debate, after the transition, in other words, from apartheid to democracy was completed when we started with the Truth and Reconciliation process. And I think that's a very important aspect in the way that if we had a Truth Commission operating while we were still conducting our debates, our negotiations in establishing a new constitution, I'm quite sure we would not have reached that point of transition because people would have been scared about what they need to hide from their past. Instead, we first entered a new phase. We had a new constitution that gave direction as far as the future is concerned. And then we could enter into the question, what about the past?
And how did you start off talking about the past? Basically, what did it take?
Well, the Truth Commission was instituted to do two things. One, to look into the atrocities of the past, who did what wrong. And it helped in that process to bring victims and perpetrators together, to help them to speak to each other. And that was an amazing process in itself. I think most South Africans were astonished by the fact that this could happen. And the second objective of the Truth Commission, of course, was to bring about reconciliation. So we worked on the assumption that only through truth we can establish a reconciliation.
So how many perpetrators have gone through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and where is it now?
The work of the Commission is completed. They have produced their final report some time ago already. I'm not sure about the exact numbers, but it was certainly thousands of perpetrators that went through the process.
What happened to them?
Well, the process that we followed was one of specific amnesty. In other words, what we said is that if a person who perpetrated and committed violence in terms of the former system, apartheid system, would declare and apply for amnesty, declare the truth about what he or she committed, and then on top of that apply for amnesty. And if the Amnesty Commission would be satisfied that the whole truth has been reported and given to it, then that person will receive amnesty. And in almost all the cases, that is what happened.
How
only
did
in a
victims
few.
feel about this?
You know, in the beginning, I think there was a lot of skepticism about this by South Africans in general, particularly the black majority. But as the process unfolded, and I must give full credit here to the way in which the Commission conducted its work, particularly under the leadership of Archbishop Tutu, who was the chairperson of the Commission. And particularly in that way, people started to come to the belief that what is happening is real. In other words, that it was a confidence-building exercise. And in the end, people trusted each other.
And they were happy to see the perpetrators go, have an amnesty?
Yes, no doubt about that. There was no negative reflection as far as that is.
They didn't want them in jail?
Well, as I said, a few didn't receive amnesty, simply because the Commission didn't believe it was the full story. They had to go back, and in some cases, they were prosecuted. Some of them went to jail, and some of the cases are even now still being investigated by the...
Can you be realistic for us and tell us exactly what will be the biggest challenges for Kosovo that you see coming out from these leaders?
I think two things are very important. Just objectively speaking, looking from the outside, knowing the Autisari plan and having had these discussions, two things come to my mind, and the one is the need for an inclusive constitution-making process. I know the time is limited. I would have preferred to see a longer period of constitution-making, but within the time constraints, I still think a lot can be done to bring on board the views of the people of Kosovo. In an organized way, it can be done through civil society or at the individual level. But
did you wonder yourself why that hasn't been already done?
I think the uncertainty that prevailed up till this moment about the future of Kosovo prevented that happening, quite frankly. I don't think one can blame anybody. It's a simple reality that up till this moment, there was no clear direction as far as the future for Kosovo is concerned.
What do you say to the president who said that actually we have constraints from the international community. We've been given, Ahtisaari package gives most segments for the constitution, and Kosovo public has nothing to add. Has very little to add because we are given this constitution anyway.
Well, I think the proposal that we have made from the international side, as well as in conjunction with the leaders who were here, were very well accepted at the conference, namely that there should be now a process of consultation, of public participation in the constitution making. So it entails two things. On the one side, there's going to be the Constitution Commission, as provided for in the Ahtisaari plan. And on the other side, we're saying it allows the opportunity for that commission to go out into public consultation. Provide the people with the draft working document, the future constitution, as it is evolving. Give it to the people for their consultation and their opinion, and also to allow them to make submissions back to the Commission. And to my mind, that process that we have proposed has been accepted by the leaders.
What would you say what would be your advice basically to the biggest risk factor that may happen to Kosovo after its D-Day? Kosovo Serbs leaving. If Kosovo Serbs are thinking of packing their bags, what can Albanian leaders do to improve that image and just basically counteract that picture that may come out of Kosovo on that day?
That's going to be a very important aspect, and I think it can be addressed in three ways. I referred to the constitution making, which is very, very important. The second one is, of course, governance, the governance of the country. We have to see a new government coming into being that will have to give direction, but also to be really accountable to the people of Kosovo, that they didn't have the opportunity to do up till now. With the existence of UNMIK, it was impossible for the government to really govern. Now there's a new phase, and I think the way in which the government is going to govern the country, bringing on board all communities, is a very important aspect. And the third one, so the first two is the constitution, then governance, and the third one, I think, is the way in which the leadership of the country, all leaders from all communities, are going to bring on board the support of the people. Let me use the example.
Exactly?
In the South African circumstances, we had the benefit of a Mandela who led the black majority in our negotiations, in the settlement, and thereafter became the first president of the country of a democratic South Africa. And the way in which he conducted this aspect was phenomenal. Because on the one side, what he did was to bring on board support from the black majority, also for the way in which they should behave towards the white minority. And on the other side...
Didn't he become unpopular because of that? Albanian leaders fear that.
I think he had the status and the stature to bring along the support simply because he was the leader who could do it. But he was always consulting also with his own constituency, with his own support base. It was not as if he was directive and prescriptive.
Certainly, Rebbe, they're just international diplomats. When they talk to Kosovo leaders, they often mention this moment where Mandela called the guards, the white guards, on one of his manifestations. Basically, we've heard these examples given to Albanian leaders, and international diplomats have been looking for a Kosovo Mandela by saying this. What if there isn't one? What if we don't have such a figure?
Before I answer that, let me just give a very specific example, because I was going to say, Mandela not only persuaded and influenced his own constituency, but he also influenced the white minority. For instance, one of the very first things he did after he was released from prison was to go and visit the widow of the Prime Minister, who was then long time dead already, who put him into jail.
Why did he do that?
So he went to her 27 years after her husband put him in jail. He went to her to say hello to her and to have a cup of tea with her.
And what did she say?
Well, she received him very well. And as a result of that, there was a message that went out to all South Africans, and that is that we have to reconcile, we have to become one nation. Now, on the question of what do we do if there's not a Mandela around?
Yeah.
And this applies to the whole world. I mean, there's only one person like him at the time. But I've worked very closely with President Mandela at the time that I was in his cabinet. After the transition, I was 2 years a member of his cabinet as Minister of Constitutional Affairs. And in that process, I learned one thing, and that is that there's a bit of Mandela in each one of us. And all that we need to do is to exercise.
You even said at the conference that he almost wasn't present in many cabinet meetings.
I was present in cabinet meetings, but he never chaired cabinet meetings, not a single one, because it was not necessary. He didn't give attention to the day-to-day management of the country. He left it over to his juniors. But what he was doing, he was bringing the nation together. He sent out the message of reconciliation. He became, personally, the symbol of reconciliation in South Africa.
Finally, why is South Africa officially skeptical about the independence of Kosovo?
Well, I think that's not necessarily the correct interpretation.
No?
I don't think so. South Africa is taking an independent role in world politics at the moment. We are a member of the Security Council at this stage.
But it has made some statements recently.
And South Africa is neither part of the Western world nor of the Asia world. We have an independent position as far as Africa is concerned.
Why is it like that? Can you explain to our audience what are the internal South African problems with that?
I don't think there's a problem as such. My interpretation is that there is not a specific problem, but I don't speak on behalf of the government because I'm not a member of the government. But I don't think this should be taken too seriously.
Thank you very much, Ms. Meijers.
Thank you.
Jemi këtu me Ashraf Ganin, I cili është drejtor I organizatës së quajtur Instituti për Shtet Efikas. Mr. Gani, Institute for State Effectiveness, how does a state become effective?
A state becomes effective by first and foremost focusing on citizens. The state is an instrument for realization of collective goals. It's not a power over citizens, it is the power of the citizens. So if that is the definition, then its effectiveness is measured by a series of functions that it performs in order to enable its citizens to lead prosperous and happy lives.
You opened the conference with some of your remarkable 8 points to concrete steps what our government and our society should do. Can you remember them and please recall them for our audience once again?
Well, the first point is Kosovo is undergoing multiple transitions. For the first time in its history, it is facing truly the prospects of governing itself. Simultaneously, there's an economic transition, there's a social transition, and there's a cultural transition. All of these are very, very significant challenges. Because of this, understanding the map is going to be really critical to see what is being done and how it's being done. Related to this is the second point, which is the question of good governance. Your main slogan to the world is going to be that we are ready to govern ourselves. But the world is going to listen to your citizens to see whether you are governing. And that means you have to have an effective program of governance. This has positive aspects, it has negative aspects. Negatively, you avoid corruption, you avoid misgovernance. Positively, you govern collectively in order that the size of the pie increases substantially so everybody can be a part of it. Third is a political process. Your unity is going to be critical to the image that you convey to the world and the sense of confidence that you create internally. Now, that unity is components. It's the unity of all Kosovars, regardless of previous backgrounds. Can you come together over a program that is a compact, truly at all levels of society?
And judging from what you've seen here, can Kosovars come together?
Kosovars must come together because the coming of Kosovars is necessary for their own well-being, for the stability of the region, and actually, despite your very small size, you're very, very significant towards stability. So it's not an option. It is one of those moments that all smaller things must be put aside.
Concretely, what do you think is our advice regarding relations with international community, about constitutions, elections, and fighting corruption?
Well, first of all, the relationship with the international community is you have to move from a mentality of dependence to one of partnership with the international community. All of you blame UNMEC, and there's a lot of blame to go, but you have to overcome that. Now, you should not be a prisoner of the past 7 years. This is your open moment of freedom of volition, freedom of will, where you can exercise and write a different chapter. The choice is, do you want to repeat the chapters of the last 7 years, where the next 7 years or continuation of that, or do you want to open a new book? This means you have to have a concrete strategy of economic governance. You have to have a very concrete strategy of rule of law. And you need to be able to lead. The international community will follow if your leadership is credible. If you don't lead them, they will fill up the vacuum.
But do you think that Kosovars are already late with not having this
No, nothing is late. Nothing is late. In history, there are rare moments when a major possibility is opened. 6 months is a very long time. If you ask me what I did in 6 months as Minister of Finance, I did a lot. So it can be a very short time, or very long time. Time does not have direction. It is we as human beings that give it meaning. So if we define our priorities within the constraints, and there are certain constraints that are given, then we can make something happen.
Let's talk about the economy, where you are an expert. Exactly what do we need to tell to the donors?
First, you need to be able to tell them that you can spend money effectively.
Can we?
Spending money effectively requires a set of decisions, both at the technical level and at the political level. I have not reviewed your situation in full to be able to answer that, but I can suggest very concrete steps as to how expenditure of the money can be effective. Second, you need to tell them that you are able to create wealth that will forever not make you a dependent of the international community, a ward of the international community. What does that mean? In concrete terms, it means, for instance, how are you going to handle telecom licensing? Will you be able to handle telecoms, mines, and your energy resources?
Briefly, these are so important for Kosovo right now. The biggest debates are happening about these three sectors. What are the models, and what will we basically give us an example of one model or another, and what will be the risk scenario of going there and the benefits of going somewhere?
I give you an example. In Afghanistan, when I came to the finance ministry, we had 100 mobile phones. Today, we have 2.5 million phones, $800 million of private sector investment.
How many telephone operators?
4.
4.
4.
For how
very
many people?
Careful for 29 million people. It has to be very carefully licensed. Initially there were 2, now there are 4. And it's expanding. And we're going to have 5 million in another 2.5 years. 70% of the country is already covered. Why? Because we brought one of the best teams in the world for 6 months, did not interfere with them, give them complete rights to evaluate the project proposals transparently. And then the Afghan cabinet came just in the last day when the decisions were being announced. With 6% of the revenue of the country was contributed by one telephone company. Alternative was what? One major international company came asking me for subsidy of $60 million so they could create 30,000 lines. Other people were coming wanting deal under the table. By avoiding corruption, or by avoiding a situation. A lot of people were coming and saying, well, we should give hundreds of licenses. No, we had to, telephone licensing has to be limited in order for people to make a profit. But it has to be limited for a limited period of time, not for forever. And then the playing field has to be very level.
How did you manage, if not yourself, but others to resist the under-the-table deals?
Because we made sure that the president of the country was on board with this commitment. We appointed a minister of communication.
Basically, did you appoint rich people? Because in Kosovo, there's an impression that only if you appoint people who have become rich before they come to governance,
no.
that's
We
the only way.
Our minister of communication still lives in one room, in almost a hut-like situation, with 10 members of his family. He is clean. He led a major NGO, and he came to the government. This is the former minister of communication, who's no longer in office. But he set an example. It was commitment. These things require a certain type of capability.
And what advice would you give in particular about energy and mining? These are two fields when Kosovo is basically putting its all hopes.
Mining requires very careful legal advice. People will tell you that legal advice is expensive. It's worth its weight in gold. The wrong concession can cost you years in court an enormous amount of revenue. So it has to be done very properly. Then there's a technical part. One needs a proper geological survey, which again requires investment in. So one knows one's resources. Then the fields need to be very carefully delineated. But most significantly, you need the human capabilities. So you need to invest and create an education of at least 1,000 Kosovars, young Kosovars, women and men, who can take the lead and understand all the technical aspects of where your natural wealth is. Then you can manage it. But it's a partnership that needs to be credible. And then you need policy stability. What is very important in a sector like mining or telephone, once through a transparent and accountable process you've given concessions, you cannot change your minds every day. If you do that, you pay a price. And people need to understand that early risk takers are the ones that are going to make money or lose it all. And one should adopt a mentality that creation of wealth, credible creation of wealth, is a good thing, not a bad thing. All property is not theft. We in our part of the world are suspicious of property because we think it's based all on theft. And a lot of it in our countries is based on theft. But all global property is not based on theft.
So how did you resolve the problem of property?
The problem of property is still a problem. But in rural areas, it was resolved. But what I'm saying is not, there are very concrete ways about resolving it. The core of resolution of property is a court system that is clean. Without a clean court system, you cannot have solid property rights. And you need to create instruments that the poor see the property as accessible to them.
Basically, in Afghanistan, could you ensure a clean court system?
No, we have a major problem now, but I did not get to it. You know, I was in government for only 3 years.
Nevertheless, did you do you know of a methodology which started working at least, showing
absolutely,
results?
Absolutely.
What did you use to make judges clean?
Singapore is the example. Singapore in 1950s was very corrupt, amazingly. Today, it's the cleanest place, probably of any government.
How did they manage?
They managed it by a systematic process of change, where from the top, there was commitment to clean up. And then they did two things. They focused on public housing. 90% of the country's housing is provided from the public sector. And creation of jobs. These two issues became the drivers of their system. So they would court all corporations at the time when it was unfashionable to court them. And the second was they provided people with affordable housing. And the third element was a meritocratic system where everybody to the system was recruited on a meritocratic basis, and the rights and obligations were enforced very strictly.
Finally, how do you how should the Kosovo government release itself from that dependency factor, basically? Is there something that you've tried in Afghanistan which has worked in telling the internationals not to meddle in our business anymore, that it's our turn to run the show?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you know, we came to office in December of 2001. I joined the government on February 1st. In March, I convened the first donors conference. It wasn't the donor conference. I called it the Afghanistan Development Forum in Kabul. We chaired it, we prepared it, we ran it. Then we established in a coordination of aid system with an effective developmental framework that, again, we produced in a month. A strategic framework that was called the Afghanistan Development Framework. And that meant that no donor could be more than 3 sectors. And for a donor to be in a second sector, they had to give us at least 30 million for the first sector to be in a second sector.
Why?
Coherence. Because otherwise, a lot of money gets to be scattered. And if people, selectivity is key to development effectiveness. So you have to have a balanced development. But if a donor spends 1 million here and 500,000 there and 200,000 there, it's not effective. So they should have a lasting impact.
And what did you tell them when they told you that Afghanistan, we're afraid that Afghanistan is riddled with corruption? We're afraid you can't manage it.
We put systems that 1/3 of our expenditure every 3 months was being audited by an international auditor, and we launched a series of major reforms of governance.
And what happened when these audits came out badly?
Well, we kept improving them. They did not come out badly. They began badly, but they kept improving steadily, and we were not.
Was someone fired? If
yes,
somebody
absolutely.
was caught stealing, were
Absolutely.
they fired?
Absolutely. But more
fired
significant. Yeah, I fired a lot of people. I'm used to firing people.
You
but
fired a
particularly
lot of
international.
people during the time that you basically
Yes, I was in
set up.
office. I fired a lot of incompetent international advisors, dozens of them.
Oh, internationals as well.
Of course, yeah. What do you think? You know, I know how to. You know, I've managed these people. Why should I be afraid of them? That if they were back, I mean, when I'm days in the World Bank, they worked for me. So why? What was difference? Just because I was working pro bono for the government of Afghanistan did not mean that I could fire them.
Doesn't mean that if they speak English, they know more than
No, they don't.
local people?
No, most of the technical assistance industry is bankrupt in terms of competence. So one has to really know that they're coming as part of an international commitment. This is not charity. Aid to developing countries that are critical to the stability of the world is not a case of charity.
Did you fire a lot of your local people
Yes,
if you
of course.
caught them
Of course.
stealing?
Of course. But
Is that how you cleaned it?
No. More significantly, it's put systems.
Yeah.
The answer is not to fire small people for small corruption. The answer is to deal with the roots of corruption. For instance, we had hundreds of bank accounts for the government. In 1 year, an Afghan woman who was under 29 years old, that I made the director of treasury, created a single treasury account. That was all computerized because before that our system was manual. And that's when we knew all our income and expenditure. It's the reporting. It's governance is not about big words. It's about running the government 365 days a year. So paper in the Ministry of Finance is more effective than guns. Because through paper you can establish accountability. And when something is legal and proper, you execute it immediately. When a request is illegal, you have to have the right to reject it. That's what the Ministry of Finance in Afghanistan, when I was in charge of it, did.
Does it mean that you take IMF's advice always?
IMF advice is on a very restricted area, which is affordability within certain parameters. The rest, they're quite neutral. And it's like every other relationship, it's a relationship of knowledge.
But what do you say, for example, to the whole idea that in Kosovo there's a perception that our salaries are small and people can't live on these salaries? IMF is saying these are the biggest salaries in the region. You need to put your salaries from the 200 euro average to 120 euro average. This to the public is just not conceivable. Why is that so? And then?
Well, I'm not familiar with the range of your discussion, so I don't want to comment on something that I've not been engaged in detail. But as I brought to your attention, every relationship of power is a relationship of knowledge. It depends on the two sides being able to understand each other in their credibility. It's not a one-sided relationship. And again, for this, the key back is returned to the human capability issue. If you're going to have a sustained partnership with the world, then you need to invest in the people who have the capability to talk their language and understand their concerns and translate it. It's an issue of mutual translation and understanding. But like every issue of translation, the possibility of misunderstanding is very high in a dialogue, and you have to be able to avoid it.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Pleasure.
Minister Hoon, after the UN Security Council resolution, Kosovo will be in the spotlight. What would you advise, what are the priorities that the leaders in Kosovo should be accomplishing in the first 120 days after this resolution?
The international community's absolute commitment to Kosovo is one of securing its stability. That has been the reason why, ever since troops first went there, to prevent ethnic cleansing, to restore order, to allow Kosovo to develop in the way that I'm delighted to see it has. Let's not anticipate just yet the results of the UN process, because obviously it has not yet concluded. But clearly we want to see progress. That progress must lead to stability.
But how important is Kosovo's status to Europe and Britain?
I think it's irretrievably linked to that question of stability. It's important because what is vital is that we do not return to the disorder, to the violence, to the killing that we saw so recently in what is an important part of the European continent.
Are you looking for quick resolution of the Kosovo status?
I don't think it's helpful at this stage to impose any kind of a time limit on this. There is a process underway internationally. It's important that all countries have the opportunity of expressing their views. It's important that we have that debate, but we accept at the same time that it's important that this does not drag on indefinitely, because obviously it is about the people on the ground in Kosovo, their future, their hopes, their aspirations, and we want them to have the clarity that necessarily follows from the process that we have been engaged in.
So when are we likely to see the end to this process?
Well, again, I repeat the answer I've just given you. I don't think it's sensible to impose an artificial timescale. We would like that to be soon. We think that's in the interests of everyone in Kosovo. But frankly, this is a process. We've had a very good process so far involving a number of countries, some with quite different views from our own. And it's important that the international community does proceed as best we can by consensus.
Would you say we'd have something by the end of this year?
Again, I just don't think it's sensible. I hope soon is a sufficient expression of our ambition for this process.
You are a Minister for Europe in UK. Can you compensate for Europe's hesitancy in having a determined, clear view on Kosovo and its support or not for the independence or not? Are you in such a position?
I simply don't agree with the use of the word hesitancy. As I've said, different countries, for all sorts of sometimes domestic reasons, have a different perspective on the situation in Kosovo, but all are committed to the idea and the importance of ensuring that whatever solution does emerge guarantees the stability of Kosovo. We're all shared in that ambition, not least those countries that from time to time have had soldiers there risking their lives sometimes in order to ensure that Kosovo has a secure and stable future. So hesitancy, I think, is quite the wrong word.
How would you describe then Europe's position at the moment on Kosovo? How would you describe it if not hesitant?
The European Union has remained absolutely united in its determination to see a secure and stable future for Kosovo, as I say.
How is the mood in Brussels?
Well, if you'll allow me, a number of those European countries have committed their forces. They've risked the lives of men and women going to Kosovo to help other people, and I think it's important that we reflect sometimes the diversity of opinion in the international community, but as far as the European Union is concerned, that is simply not the case. We have remained absolutely united in our commitment to Kosovo and will remain so.
And what is Britain's position, particularly Britain's position on Kosovo at the moment?
Well, we have set out very clearly our view. I did so in a debate quite recently in the House of Commons. We have supported very strongly the Ahtisaari process. I've seen him regularly. We're part of the contact group. We've argued clearly for the support that he has received internationally, and we will go on giving that support ourselves.
Do you support Kosovo's independence?
I think ultimately the report that he has set out leads in that direction, but I don't think we should anticipate the results of the
Why not?
process.
What's wrong with anticipating?
Well, if you'll allow me to finish answering your question. It's important that we set in motion a process. The international community have so far been united in their approach. I think it's important that we should continue as best we can, as I've said already, with consensus. There may well be at certain stages a difference of timing, a different emphasis. The European Union's remained united. The UK has been an important voice in that process, and I think it's right that we should allow the process to reach its conclusion and not anticipate it.
Is this because Europe wants to slowly bring Russia to the idea of supporting Ahtisaari's package? And can you explain to the audience who will be watching this, is nervous about Russia claiming it will maybe use the veto in the Security Council? Is this bluffing, or is Russia trying to raise the stakes? What should people be nervous about this delay, and particularly Russia's hesitancy?
What's actually important is that we should use this process to secure the long-term stability and security of Kosovo.
What does that mean?
Well, I'm going to try and explain to you. Sometimes rushing ahead with these kinds of decisions without taking the international community along can lead to further problems in the future. And that's why we have established a process, why we've agreed, for example, for a mission to go to Kosovo, why we accept that there needs to be a discussion in the Security Council, why we will work towards a resolution, why we believe that it's right that we should try and achieve that as best we can through consensus. It's a process. By engaging in that process internationally, I believe we best secure the long-term outcome in terms of security and stability for Kosovo.
EU will take over some fields of administering Kosovo after UNMIK finishes its mission. Why do you think it's going to do better than the UN mission in Kosovo?
UNMIK has done a tremendous job and has been extremely successful in this phase of Kosovo's development. And anyone like me who's been from time to Kosovo has seen the tremendous improvement that has been made, and UNMIK has fostered that. We believe that we're now moving into a different stage as far as Kosovo is concerned. The skills, the requirements of UNMIK perhaps are less necessary. Some of the skills that the EU can bring to bear, I think, will be helpful. This is part of Europe. It's a European responsibility, and I believe it's right that the EU should step up to the plate and take its share of what is taking place there.
But EU is good at transforming, not administering. Would you agree there?
On the contrary, I think you'll find the European Union administers, or helps to administer, a very large area with some 460 million citizens, so I wouldn't accept that for a moment, no.
So are you interested, EU, do you imagine this mission will be basically running some parts of administration in Kosovo? How do you imagine to be the role of this future mission?
I think he will be engaged in providing help and assistance in particular areas.
Mm-hmm.
It remains to be seen what those areas are in detail, but I don't anticipate that it will be an operation as comprehensive as UNMIK was, because clearly what we're looking for, more and more responsibility being carried out by Kosovans themselves. That must be the long-term future for Kosovo.
What are the lessons you will take from EU's experience in Bosnia and Macedonia? What you would like to avoid, and what would you like to take on?
Well, in each of those areas we have sought the same things: security for the people, stability, and long-term constitutional arrangements that ensure that that security and stability is not challenged in the future. I don't think beyond that it's necessarily the case that comparisons can be particularly helpful. In each case, the international community has worked hard to bring about a better situation. It certainly succeeded in each of those cases. But obviously there are different problems in Bosnia-Herzegovina than there are in Macedonia, than there are again in Kosovo. But our ambition is the same in each case.
You visited Serbia in February. How long do you think it will take them to come around? For example, they didn't like Montenegro becoming independent, but they accepted it afterwards. From the conversations you had with the leaders there, what's the feeling you got, basically? Would they accept whatever terms come from this agreement?
I think we all understand why this is a difficult problem for Serbia. As you say, why Montenegro was a difficult problem.
But it wasn't afterwards.
These are historic questions as far as the people of Serbia are concerned, and I hope that we can find a way in which they could become reconciled to any change of status.
People of the Balkans are being prepared eventually to enter the EU. Do you think that actually they are being prepared for maybe something that the public in the European states is growing more and more skeptical of? Or will countries of the Balkans eventually, do you see them? Is your vision, do you see them in the EU?
I've made clear on all of my visits to the Balkans that our ambition for the Balkans and indeed for the European Union is to see all those with a European ambition able to succeed in that, provided they carry through the necessary reforms and changes. And I think the progress we've seen in Croatia, obviously, in Macedonia, but indeed in other parts of the Balkans, leads me to believe that certainly it is possible. It does depend on the individual countries themselves making the necessary reforms.
What would you say to the critics who basically would point out that at the moment, just now, 10 days ago, America organized a conference with the Kosovo leaders planning the first 120 days, planning the roadmap. This wasn't organized by Europe. It was again organized by America. America is taking the lead in pushing for Kosovo's maybe independence. What would you say to the critics who think that Europe is again failing to take the lead on this case?
I'd invite them to go and visit that range of countries that have recently joined the European Union, starting most recently obviously with Romania and Bulgaria, but going through a range of countries, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, countries that have fundamentally reformed in order to be members of the European Union. No one who's a greater admirer of the United States than I am. The United States cannot create the conditions in which countries in the Balkans can join the European Union. That's a matter for the countries themselves, but ultimately, of course, it's a matter for the European Union.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Zënyseni, ju jeni në New York. Çka jeni të bëu këtu? Çfarë është puna juaj momentalisht?
Në New York jam pas një vendimi që ka marrë ekipi i unitetit për të themeluar një grup i cili me rotacion do të qëndrojë në New York në vazhdimsi për të lobuar. Për të lobuar, për të animuar kryesisht ato vende në Këshill të Sigurimit që ende nuk kanë një qëndrim të qartë, s'kan adoptuar një pozicion karshi propozimit presidentit Ahtisaari dhe rekomandimit për status.
Dhe si duket kjo një ditë e përditshme në këtë lobim? Ken takoni, çka
Një
thonë?
ditë e zakonshme e këtij lobimi duket kështu. Takohem me ambasador ose me profesues të përhershëm të vendeve të ndryshme, kryesisht po them të vendeve antare të zgjedhura të Këshillit të Sigurimit. Domethënë antare të zgjedhura janë antare jo të përhershme, jo permanente. Ose me zëvendës të tyre, ose me ekspert, në rastet shpeshherë me drejtor ose koordinator politik të misioneve të ndryshme në Këshill të Sigurimit.
Me cilat shtete për shembull keni taku deri tash?
Po kam pas takime të shumta, që nga ambasadori kinez të zam, egjiptas, ambasadori indis, me Ganën, me Kongon, me Perun, me Panaman, me paka shumë po thuaj me gjithë antarët e zgjedhur të Këshillit të Sigurimit, por edhe disa vende që kanë influencë, kanë ndikim në disa, për shembull Egjipti nuk është antar i Këshillit të Sigurimit, as India. Po kam kërkuar dhe kam realizuar takime me këto vende, sepse janë vende me ndikim. India të zanë në botën e tretë, ose në atë që quhet vendet e painkuadruara, ose Egjipti është vend me ndikim në vendet islamike, që janë antare në Këshillin e Sigurimit.
Mirë, na tregoni për këtyre shteteve që jeni taku, kush është kundër pavarësisë të Kosovës dhe pse?
Nga të gjitha vendet me të cilat kemi realizuar takime deri më tash, kundër pavarësisë të Kosovës nuk është askush. çështja është që shumë nga këto vende, hiç Rusin, nuk kanë ende qëndrim as pro pavarësisë të Kosovës.
As është Kina kundër pavarësisë Kosovës?
As Kina nuk është deklaruar kundër. Absolutisht jo. Edhe Kina deklarohet se është në proces të edukimit më tej.
Mirë, a mund ta riformuloj pyetjen?
Kush
nuk e përkrah pavarësinë e Kosovës haptas? Kush nuk e përkrah? Dhe pse ju kanë, cilat janë argumentet?
Deri më tash është vetëm Rusia ajo që kërkon zvarritje dhe shtymje të procesit, kërkon rinegocim të krejt çështjes. Asnjë shtet tjetër nuk është deklaruar. Do me thonë, prandaj edhe funksioni i qëndrimit të njerëzve nga Kosova, vizitave më të gjata që i bëjmë, dhe vetëm kështu duhet t'i kualifikojmë, është që këtyre vendeve që nuk kanë qëndrim ende, tu spjegohet natyra shumë specifike e çështjes të Kosovës.
Pse është Afrika e Jugut kundër? Çka është problemi i Afrikës Jugës për shembull me pavarësinë e Kosovës?
As Afrika e Jugut nuk është deklaruar kundër ende, ajo s'është deklaruar për. Po Afrika e Jugut thotë se nuk ka qëndrim ende. Arsyeja është kjo. Shumë vende afrikane, Kongo, Ghana, që janë anëtarët të zgjedhura të Këshillit të Sigurimit, jo të përhershme. E shumë vende tjera afrikane në kohën e braktisjes, e tërheqjes së fuqive kolonialiste, shumë vende janë vizatuar me, të them kushtimisht, me një vizor të drejtë. Dhe rrjedhimisht shumë fise, për të mos thënë edhe popull, kanë met të shpërndam 2, 3, 4, 5 shtete. Dhe simbas tyne ka frigohen nga një lloj precedenti që mund të krijoj të zanë pavarësia e Kosovës. Mirë po, për ditë e ma shumë, ata e kuptojnë që Kosova është rast specifik, sepse është ajo që po thuhet episodi i fundit i shpërbërjes së një shteti, shpërbërjes një federate, shpërbërjes jo konsensuale të një federate, sepse ka qenë federate edhe Çekoslovakia, po është shpërbërë me konsensus. Ndërka që Federata ish Jugoslave është shpërbërë në mënyrë jo konsensuale, përmes luftrave tragjike, në fund edhe përmes një lufte në Kosovë.
Në këto takime, kur mundoni me aranxhu dhe me lëbu, a ka dikush që s'ju pret dhe ka dikush që s'ja var veshin as pak Kosovës dhe nuk është interesu mas t'ju pres, për shembull, më intereson cili shtet është?
Po, shiqoni, për një periudhë shumë të shkurt, për shumë pak ditë, mund të them, sepse kishte edhe 2 ditë pushimi në OKB, ju e dini në OKB ka shumë festa cilat respektohen, po për shumë pak ditë janë organizuar shumë takime, dhe nuk mund të them, do me thonë, nuk mund të veçoj asnjë shtet që ka refuzuar të takohet me ne.
Kush i organizon takimet? Si funksionon kjo?
Është një na ndihmojnë vendet të ndryshme, na ndihmojnë seksionet ndryshme në OKB, përpiqemi vetë, do me thonë, kemi krijuar kontakte për një periudhë relativisht shkurt, kemi krijuar kontakte të caktuara. Pastaj nga vizitat paraprake, disa nga njerëz që kanë pas rastin të bëjnë vizita më herët në OKB, kanë do kontakte më të vjetra. Me fjalë tjera shfrytëzohen të gjitha mënyrat dhe mundësitë për të vu kontaktet.
Dhe çka ndodh tash kur ju shkoni, ju keni qenë këtu 2 javë, çka do ndodh prej tash, si të mbahet kontinuitet?
Po, thash që është bërë një grup me rotacion. Mua do të më zavendësoj shumë shpejt, këto ditë ish kryeministri Bajram Rexhepi. Dhe këtu është një person teknik që vazhdon të qëndroj, do të vazhdoj të qëndroj me të gjithë. Me të gjithë, pas Bajram Rexhepit, nëse nuk harroj, është ministri Gjini, pas ti Zoti Hysaj, dhe pas ti Blerim Shalë.
Dhe të gjithë jeni nga 2 javë?
Ky është ky grup prej 5 vetësh për rotacion që është sa ju dhe po, të gjithë rrim nga 2 javë, do me thonë, plus minus, tashti mvaret edhe nga një herë.
Në këto javët e ardhshme vendimtare për këtë vend, ku e gjitha do të vendosit në New York, tash bëhet diplomacia më e madhe ndërkombëtare pasi që është kryer ajo në Vjenë. A nuk konsideroni që do të ishte me praktike, të ishte një fytyrë, një person që do ta shtynte këtë proces, a nuk është ajo diçka që bëjnë zakonisht shtetet?
Dëgjoni, unë nuk do të diskutoja shumë këtë, sepse vërtet nuk konsideroj që ka peshë të madhe shumë. Po ju them pse. Ky grup është mjaft homogen, janë kryesisht njerëz që kanë qenë shumë thellë të kyçur gjatë gjithë procesit, për vendosjen e statusit. Do me thonë janë të informuar, kanë me bollëk informacion se çfarë duhet të mbrojnë në takimet në New York. Pastaj, gjatë gjithë qëndrimit tim të zamë dhe takimeve që kam pas, vazhdimisht, mrena orës janë informue përmes e-mailit dhe raporteve të ndryshme gjithë antarët tjerë të grupit me rotacion. Do me thonë, në vazhdimësi ata e kanë ditë çfarë bëj on New York, njësoj si që do ta di on, çfarë bën tjetri që do të më zavendësoj. Dhe unë nuk...
Nëse dojnë të përgatitur, vetëm e kam këta, për shtypjen që dojnë të lejmë, a nuk dojnë të lejmë për shtypjen një shteti, në dojnë të përgatitim që ky rol të jetë i një përfaqësuesi të Kosovës?
Pikërisht, atë për shtypje po e lam për shtypjen e një shteti në lindje, që si çdo lindje ka të lashët dhe problemet e veta të caktuara, po kjo nuk është problem, unë ju siguroj që nuk është një problem. Shqiconi, për shkak të dinamikës që nga njëherë është gati e pakontrollueshme të procesit, detyrohemi të bëjmë hapat shpejt. Dhe ky hap ka dalë që është i qelluar dhe do ta shohim krejt në fund që është i qelluar. Përpos kësaj pranie, mos harrojmë, ne kemi bani një plan, kemi një dinamik të pranisë të shtuame edhe të antarëve të ekipit të unitetit, edhe New York, po edhe udhëtimeve të shumta nëpër kryeqytete, kudo që të mbërrim. Sidomos nëpër ato kryeqytete të vendeve që ende kanë dilemat të caktuara, përkatësisht ende nuk kanë marrë një qëndrim të prerë se çfarë do të.
Zgjuseni, pse s'kemi ende zyre të Kosovës në New York në momentin kaq vendimtar për vendin tonë, s'kemi një zyre?
Unë mund të flas me javë tana, pse, çka është dashur të bëhet, çka mund të bëhet. Po, unë pretendoj të jem pak më praktik dhe të shoh gjërat e mundshme.
Po, as do të ishte zyrja diçka praktike që në nënvitet tash?
Do të ishte tepër praktike, po nuk është zyrja, prandaj unë me qenë se nuk është zyrja, tash nuk duhet hes dorë dhe të tham s'duhet bëjmë asgjë tjetër.
Mirë, po pse nuk është ta qartësojmë?
Po ka shumë arsye, unë vërtet do duhej me elaboru me javë tana, jo me ditë, po me javë tana, pse?
A janë mungesa pareve, mungesa konsensusit politik?
Unë do ta them një arsye, Një arsye është që nuk duhet dhe nuk guxojmë të improvizojmë ose të bëjmë surrogate. Ose madje nuk guxojmë edhe të provokojmë në New York. Ne duhet ta dimë që unë do t'u zbuloj tash që disa delegacione tashmë kanë bërë vrejtje për praninë tonë edhe kështu si është në New York. Dhe kjo nga disa vende anëtare të Këshillit të Sigurimit.
Po pse duhet frikojmë ne për vrejtjeve tyre?
Sepse varemi nga votat e tyre.
Mali Zi ka pa zyre të ekonomisë para se me qenë, për shembull.
Jeta, unë nuk po them që ne nuk duhet t'i bëjmë gjitha këto. Është dashur ka herë t'i kemi. Nuk e vej këtë në dyshim absolutisht. Po unë po them, pretendoj të jem praktik dhe çka mund të bëjmë këtu e tutje. Këtu e tutje e kemi filluar me këtë. Nuk duhet ta quajmë as kështu, nuk duhet ta quajmë ose ta kualifikojmë si kur gjë më shumë se që është. Është një grup me rotacion, që do të qëndrojnë...
Po e lojmë të kalumën mrapa, nuk i kemi. Kur do t'i kemi? Atëherë në të ardhmen, kur do t'i kemi?
Unë jam shumë i sigurt që do t'i kemi shumë shpejt dhe mund të thuhet që janë fillet përpjekjet e para që bëhen më konsolidue.
Na tregoni diçka për këto fille. A kanë filluar bisedat?
Prania e Kosovës në New York dhe Xhetiu. Pak ma shumë do të kemi mundësi t'ju themi, mas pak kohësh. Hë për hë, ne operojmë nga dhomat e hoteleve.
Mas pak kohësh, momentalisht është momenti ku ne duhet t'i planifikojmë, t'i kemi hazër veç qelsat.
Momentalisht, momenti është, nëse me ndonë zyre fizikisht, si zyra fizikisht nuk kryen funksion. Momentalisht funksioni po kryhet relativisht me këtë prani, po e cila duhet shtohet.
Do me thanë, madje se kemi as vullnetin politik momentalisht, jeni të thanë, që zyrja fizikisht nuk kryen punë, po vullneti politik, po supozoj që duhet.
Ka vullnet politik, unë nuk e shoh që mungon vullneti politik, vërtet, sepse ky grup që është themeluar për 5 minuta. Do me thamë, aq lehtë është...
A ka mundësi në Kosovë për 5 minuta mu marrë vesh kush e përfaqëson Kosovën në Amerikë, apo është punë që ka shumë kandidat edhe mendohet që ai njeri do të bëhet më shumë?
Unë e çmaj këtë sensin tanë për insistim, je gazetare shumë insistuese dhe absolutisht e çmaj.
Publiku po do me di.
Okej, po, unë mund të them vetëm aq sa vërtet mund të them, dhe atë që e mendoj se duhet thuhet. Unë nuk dua të spekuloj dhe nuk kam dëshirë të spekuloj. Unë jam i sigurt që te spektri politik në Kosovë ka fuqi edhe humane, edhe intelektuale, edhe politike.
Duket që keni kriju një lloj përvoje të shkurt, mjaft interesante me diplomaci të huaj në këtë kohë. Tregoni, a ka thjesht, si e shihni veten në të ardhmen, a ka fillu kjo shije për diplomaci të huaj, për shembull, më ju pëlqy, a mendoni që keni afinitet dhe shihni veten si një përfaqësues i Kosovës diku në të ardhmen?
Ma bani një pyetje shumë direkte dhe shumë personale, ndoshta për herë të parë do të përgjigjem edhe direkt edhe personalisht, nëse më lejohet. Më besoni, e them me plot sinqeritet që asnjëherë nuk e kam projektuar dhe nuk dua ta projektoj. Unë kam marrë këtu të qëndroj 2 javë. Nëse dikush më pyet cili është titulli yt, pse je këtu, unë jam një vizitor. Po i vizitoj jo këtë bët, po përpiqem me taku.
Po mirë, po është normale, gjithë kemi plane.
Okej, gjithë kemi plane, absolutisht. Po
A do të dëshironi
po ju them me
ta
sinqeritet
përfaqësoni
më të madh.
Kosovën?
Do të vi koha kur do të mendojmë edhe për projekcione personale.
Kjo kohë është brenda muajsh.
Janë saktësisht tash i ban, domethënë ja 15 vjet që në vazhdimsi kam qenë pak a shumë në këtë problematikë me presidentin Rugova, një kohë të gjatë, jam edhe antari kryesisë Lidhjes Demokratike të Kosovës, i kam e udhëheq komisionin për punë të jashtme në kryesitë Lidhjes Demokratike. Dhe po them pse është zgjedhur ky format i këtij grupi për rotacion. Motivi ose arsyeja kryesisht ka qenë që të bëhet një grup me njerëz që kanë qenë të kyçur në proces. Dhe në vazhdimsi, domethënë, kanë qenë të mishnuar
me ju vetën në ata. Një ditë pas rezolutës, Kosova do të ka nevojë për fatësime shumë denja jashtë, njerëz që dinë çush mu sill. Na tregoni për kvalitetin e këtyre njerëzve, domethënë, çka duhet të kenë këta njerëz?
Unë besoj që një prej sfidave kyçe të Kosovës pas pavarësisë është ndërtimi i asaj që quhet shërbim diplomatik i vendit ose shërbim i jashtëm.
A kemi mjaft kapacitete njerëzore zë njëseni?
Jo. Do ta them traç. Jo, dhe do të ketë nevojë që të shkollohet një kuadër i tanë, pak a shumë i gjithë shërbimi i huaj ose diplomatik, mbetet shihet si do ta quajmë, disa vende e quajnë shërbimi i huaj ose i jashtëm, do tjerë e quajnë shërbim diplomatik. Dhe Kosova do të detyrohet që shumë shpejt të hyjë kësaj pune shumë të rëndësishme dhe të ndërlikuar dhe komplekse, tu i identifikuar potencialin resurset njerëzore ose humane që aktualisht i ka Kosova.
A jeni ju përkrahas idesë që duhet të miren më shumë njerëzit që janë për ato vende, apo që njerëzit duhet të dërgohen nga Kosova? Cila është më praktike edhe do të na përfaqësonte më mirë?
Po shikoni, edhe këtu të kesh një mendim të prerë edhe në këtë është vështirë. A di pse varet për cilin vend flet. Derisa tazam në Shtetet Bashkuara të Amerikës ka potencial, ka shumë shqiptar kosovar që kanë përgatitjet e duhura, ndoshta për të marrë përsi për disa nga këto obligime. Mirë, po në të njëjtën kohë ata kanë bizneset e veta, kanë punët e veta, dhe është vështirë që përfaqësim të denjë dhe adekuat shtetnor Kosova do të ketë përmes dërgimit të njerëzve nga Kosova. Po kjo nuk do me thonë për që atje ku mundemi dhe atje ku na ofrohet mundësia, të mos i shfrytëzojmë edhe ato resurse humane të Kosovës që janë në përvendet ndryshme. Dhe t'i vejmë në funksione të ndryshme, do me thonë. Jo domosdoshmërisht t'i mbyllim në përzyra nga shtetetor dhe torë në ditë, po t'i shfrytëzojmë në mënyra ndryshme.
Shpresojmë t'jetë ashtu. Faleminderit shumë.
Kjo ishte krejt çka kishim për ju sonte, vetëm se jemi jashtë Kosovës nuk do të thonë që nuk mujmë lexu letrat e juja. Na shkruani në info@jetankosov.com, mos hopni, na shkruani deri në prandën e ardhshme, shihemi, natën e mirë.
Kosova në Amerikë.
Allo, minister. Po kam ko për takim sot, hajde të themi në ora 4. Jo tune, let vitë zyra jote. Okej, tata. O tu nga Jeta. Unë jam Casey Cooper Johnson, dhëndri Kosovës, edhe për ndryshe jam ambasadori parë të Kosovës e dërguar në Britania e Madhe. Detyra ime është për të forcuar marrëdhënie të mirë në mes Kosovë dhe Britanisë, duke shtuar interesat të Kosovës në skenën e politikë të jashtme të Britanisë të Madhe. Momentalisht, kjo është zyra ime. Afër meje është ambasadë Timor Lindor edhe këtu është ambasadë e Malit të Zi. Normal, momentalisht, kushtet nuk janë komedi çka për shkak të buxhetit. Mirë po, unë jam në vendin e duhur. Nështë ju menoni që zyra ime është tepër e vogël për me kryer ndaj punë të mirë. Po, dhe të dini që unë jam shumë e suksesshme. Duke i falenderuar iniciativët temën, unë kam ndihmuar Kosovën shumë. Për shembull, në fushën e arsimit, e kam marrë vesh me Britani për një shkëmbim edukativ arsimore, ku nxënësit të Kosovës do të shkojnë çdo vit në Britani për me mësu antikorrupsion. Derisa nxënësit të Britanisë do të vinë në Kosovë çdo vit për me mësu çish me bë korrupsion. Sa mirë. Edhe kam organizuar për kulturë, se jam ambasador e kulturum. Na do të bëjmë një shkëmbim vjetore kulturore, ku shfaqje teatral, muzik jazz, edhe art vizuale nga Britani do të vjenë me shfaqje në Kosovë, edhe na do të çojmë yjet më të madh nga strada të Lavas edhe ekipit serialeve televiziv të Kosovës. Edhe më e rëndësishme është fushë e biznesit. E kemi marrë vesh një punë që ka me qenë shumë e mirë për Kosovën. Na do të shojmë dhe do të eksportojmë rrymë edhe sallata Kosovës në Britani. Britani do të na çojnë Guinness edhe çaj anglis, se s'ka më me të pije çaj rusi.
The other way, on the right-hand side, you'll see an archway in the embankment wall.
Gjatë aktivitetit të mia diplomatike, unë jam taku me shumë njerëz të rëndësishme. E kam marrë përkraje plotësisht nga Prince Charles si edhe mbretëresha e Anglisë. Ai djalosh në majt e ka emrin fëmi, edhe jeton në Angli që 20 vjet. Ai ka filluar si rojet në diskotek e çire kur ka arrit ai. Në takimi me Tony Blair dhe George Bush, ishte nevojshme të janë ngull këmbë edhe me trokit në tavolinë, se si duhet të ballafaqohemi me Rusinë restatuesin e Kosovës. Edhe retorik kundërshtuese e president Putinit e kam zbut shumë pastaj. E kam najt me Madalin pak, si edhe Brad Pitt edhe Angelina Jolie. Mirë po, ata ishin pa qef. Ndoshta pse ja kanë ra pishman që kanë adaptu ata njerëz të kthyer në Kosovë. Ndërkohë, Tom Cruise më ka lut për idenë me xhiru Mission Impossible Pass në Kosovë. Besoj që do të pranoj, sidomos mbas që Schwarzenegger tash është bo politikan edhe ai më nuk mundet me lujt në filmin Terminator 4. Plus kam bo shumë progres të fitu mbështetje për pavarësinë nga forcat ekstremist, piratëve, prej ishut të karaberianëve, si edhe shoqata e superheronjit të universit. Tani unë jam bo ambasador shumë i rëndësishme, edhe unë jam në rrezik çdo moment. Ndoshta ajo veç mirës me fry pak. Për këtë arsye e kam investuar në sigurimi të nivelit më të lartë. Ta janë truprojet të mia. Janë shumë profesionist. E, qëri qarë femër të bukur. Apo she, I di se të bënume. Halal pare.
Change!
Ka dale, mëre, mos më tut. Ju mund të imagjinoni se sa diplomaci e kam bo këtu në pretënje madhe, edhe sa pare e kam bledh për Kosovë. Po tash, ata lideret atje s'po muaj më marrë vesh, janë në të lëvi, edhe thjesht s'po di kune mja që qarë pare. Prandaj kam vendos për moment me investu krejt pare në ambasad e re Kosovës privat, që qaj amune. Edhe mas që po doket që përna afrot pavarësia, e kam organizu një ndaje për disa miqë të mi. Gjibrish, hajde!
E, Tony Blair, kur për mi këthen paret? Borgjin? Tony. O, George. Kush ka leju George me pip? George bësh shumë keq me raki. Po duhet, që me bo. E qoj George edhe një pjerë. Kush është të dera? Minister Hun? Ja, search and list. S'pan me hi. Pastore pa.